Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome back to Synth Stuff. This is all about the Casio CZ-5000. Coming up. If you remember, a few weeks back, actually it's probably more than a month now, I got this Casio CZ-5000 from a friend of mine who was just going to throw it away. He bought this thing new. He's got the manuals, all the original wires, everything for this thing. He told me he bought this thing back in the 80s and he's been using it ever since for composing and so on. And did I want it? I'm like, sure. And I'm thinking profit or something great. And then he says it's a Casio. And I'm like, oh, great, Casio. But it turned out it was not what you think of when you think of Casio. It is the amazing CZ-5000, which was Casio's attempt at going professional. So this is a full metal case, fully programmable synthesizer, no speakers, no cheesy PCM sounds or samples. This is pure synthesizer. It does have a sequencer on board, has patch storage, all the stuff that you would expect of a professional synthesizer in the 1980s. There's only one thing really wrong with it, and that is the battery storage area. If you have a look at the insides here, I opened the case up, you can have a look. The battery's corroded at one point, and you can see there's corrosion inside the case here. And as a result, underneath where the batteries actually mount, it's corroded as well, and in fact one of the springs is completely gone. I've got a replacement battery holder on order. I'm gonna have to solder it in with the wires once it comes. I'll put a set of lithium batteries in there, and that will keep the memory in it for years to come. And that's all the batteries are used for in this synthesizer, is to maintain the user memory. And that's why all the user memory slots for the patch storage in the synthesizer are empties, because it has no battery in there. It does have the factory presets, and I have a copy of Virtual CZ, which is a soft synth emulation of the CZ-5000. I've had it for a number of years. It has a whole collection of patches in there, and if you hook it up with MIDI to an existing CZ-3000, 5000, or any other Casio CZ synth, it can actually send those patches as sysx to this synth. I've done that, and I've put a couple banks in here of sounds so we can listen to, but as soon as I turn it off, those are going to go away because obviously there's no battery in there. So once I get the battery installed, I'll load up those user presets with all the good sounds that I can find online. And there's tons and tons of sounds available online for this thing. And as I do for all of my synthesizer reviews, let's listen to a small track that I put together using only the Casio CZ-5000. So those are the only sounds you're going to hear in this track, except I think I used Dom Segalis's 80s drum kit. I can't remember the actual name of it. I'll put a link to it in the description below. It's a fantastic drum machine, soft synth for 80s sounding drums, which I thought fit well with an 80s synthesizer like this. So let's talk about how this synthesizer works. So how does this thing actually function? It's totally different than any other kind of synthesis. When this thing came out, analog was king. Everything was analog. You had your sawtooth, your triangle, your pulse or square wave sounds, and sometimes you'd have noise as well. And that's pretty much all that analog synthesizers could do, because they're just circuits that are oscillating, and you can't really do much with an oscillating circuit other than just change maybe the shape and how quickly certain parts of the waves go. But this is digital, so there's nothing analog here at all. absolutely no analog in here. In terms of the synthesis engine, there is zero analog here at all. Yamaha came out with the DX7, which was completely digital, and what they did is they had sine waves. So you had a sine wave, and then you had another sine wave that could modulate the first sine wave, and you could have a whole stack of different sine waves modulating each other in terms of the speed that the sine wave is playing back. So it could modulate the frequency, which is where you get frequency modulation or FM synthesis from, and by doing so could create harmonics, and that's where you get those famous bell sounds that the DX7 is known for. This is a little bit different. It's kind of the same idea as frequency modulation, but they call it phase distortion modulation. Let me explain how it works. So again, it's just sine waves, and like the DX7, because sine waves, at least in 1985 terms, take a lot of math to generate. And if you're generating sine waves at a frequency of several hundred times per second, for instance, for an A, that's generating a sine wave 440 times a second. That's a lot of math for an old processor from 1985 to try to work out, because it requires trigonometry to generate the sine and cosine and get the values and so on. So both Yamaha and Casio did away with that entirely, and instead they generated those sine waves ahead of time and just stored it in memory. So literally, these are wavetable synthesizers. They're playing a wavetable, and the wavetable has one wave in it, and it is a sine wave. So the DX7 and the Casio CZ series are basically wavetable synthesizers playing sine waves. Really, honestly, that's how they work. The difference is, what does it do to that sine wave as it's playing it back? Well, in the case of the Casio, it changes the speed at which it plays each sine wave cycle back. So it has two speeds involved. One is the speed at which it plays the first half of the sine wave, and then it has a different speed that it can play the second half. And if you speed that up, a sine wave that looks like this, if you play the first part of that cycle really, really quickly, almost instantaneously, you get a ramp that comes up really quick. And then if you slow down the second part and play it down slower, you get something that looks remarkably like a sawtooth. And that's exactly how they generate the different tones in here, is by playing back the sine wave at different speeds. So they have a table of parameters that tell you how it's going to play back the speed of each sine wave cycle, and in doing so they can generate all kinds of different waveforms that look similar to analog synthesizer waveforms. Now, they don't let you modify those speeds yourself. There's 8 different ones that they have selected for you, and I'll talk about those in just a moment. Now, the architecture is such that there are 2 digital oscillators. You can play one oscillator and you get 16 notes of polyphony. If you choose to play both oscillators in your sound to make it fatter or have more depth or variety or timbre, then you get 8 notes of polyphony. You can also tone mix, where you have 2 different tones. So if I wanted to have a preset A1 and overlay that or layer it with preset A2, you can do that, but again, that's going to half your polyphony. But it does give you the ability to do a lot of layering to get some interesting sounds. And the envelopes in this thing are crazy. I think there's 8 steps? 8-step envelopes, because it's all digital. They're not restricted to the old analog ADSR where you only have just a few sliders and some capacitors charging up to run that. Here it's digital, anything goes, so if they wanted to put 24 steps into their envelopes, they could. They did 8, and I think 8 is pretty ridiculous as well. The envelopes in this thing are really, really complicated and stupid. Nobody in their right mind wants to program this thing because the envelopes are so complex. If you ever do want to program this, I suggest you get something like the Virtual CZ, where it's all on a screen in front of you, and you can just adjust things very quickly instead of going into the menu and selecting envelopes, and then going into step 13, and then go over here to the length and the amplitude, and it takes 10 minutes to just adjust one envelope on one oscillator. It's just nuts. At least on the DX7, they had a data entry slider, so you could quickly select the amount you want. This thing, if you want to go into an envelope and then change the envelope rate or level, I got a cursor over to level, and then I go all the way up to hit level up or down to get to the value I want. If you imagine, you have to do that for 8 different steps just for one envelope on one oscillator. And we've got 3 different envelopes because you have an oscillator envelope, a wave envelope, and an amplitude envelope. And if you want to kill yourself and do sound design on the synthesizer itself, then go to it. Otherwise, I suggest do it on the computer and then transfer the sounds to the synth. Or if you are not into sound design, there's tons and tons of patches out there, some free, some paid, that you can actually download into the synth with a variety of different applications that will do that. All right, we're going to try this again because I just went through and recorded for about 40 minutes and lost it all. And we're going to start over again. Yay, I love it when this happens. Here is the CZ-5000. We're going to talk about all the different controls we have on here. We have the master tune, allows you to change the overall tuning of the instrument. So if you have something, an old analog synth that's playing out of tune, you could adjust this to match it. Key transpose, pretty standard key transpose. You can change what key you're playing in. You can transpose it without actually knowing how to transpose. The portamento and glide are obviously what they do. The portamento allows for, let's turn it on solo mode. Solo mode is just our monophonic versus polyphonic. So if I have solo mode off, I can play chords. Solo mode, you only get one note, so it's monophonic. So let's leave it in monophonic mode. We'll turn portamento on, which obviously does a portamento. We do have a portamento adjustment over here that if I press that, I can adjust the time. And then the glide is for individual note presses. So if I turn on the glide, you can hear it gliding into the note with pitch, and the glide parameter allows us to change, is it coming from below or above? We can put it so it's coming down from above, and how fast it's going to do that. So that's our glide mode. Over here we have, well, let's talk about the program section. This is just our presets. So we have 4 banks of factory presets and 4 banks of user memory. Each of those has 8 patches. So a total of 32 presets, 32 memory, 64 total patches storage. Over here we have how it's actually going to play. If it's normal mode, we just get it, it plays normally. We have 8 or 16 notes of polyphony depending on how we have it set up. Tone mix. Tone mix, in other words, is our layering. So we have level 1, level 2, and this is where you can actually set how loud each part of the layer is. So if I turn level 2 all the way down, we're only going to hear level 1. I'm going to put it back to level 1. And while it's adjusting the volume of it, it also allows us to pick the sound. So let's pick this flute sound, and now we're going to go over to level 2, and it has got this kind of a. I'll put the volume up for level 2. So it's got that drum sound. So now we have a drum sound and a flute at the same time. We could change the drum sound to something else. That's kind of a nice one. It's got a flute and kind of a bell sound mixed together. So that's our tone mix. When we use our tone mix, it's multi-timbral, so it halves our polyphony. So if we're using both layers 1 and 2, or lines 1 and 2 they call it, so that means we only have 8 notes, and then if we use tone mix, we now have 4 notes. So it reduces that polyphony. Key split is exactly what you think it is, a key split, so we can have one sound on the bottom and a different sound on the top. Sequencer, not going to talk about the sequencer. I rarely use the sequencer in the synthesizer. It does work. I managed to get it recording and reset, and it does do what it's supposed to do. It's a fairly complex sequencer. It's an 8-track sequencer. You can put rests, you can put automation into it. If you have a look at the sequencer over here, you can see we do have all these different tracks you can select. You can do real-time recording, you do step recording, you can insert rests, dotted notes, you can all this stuff. It's a very complex sequencer, and that's actually why the original owner of this bought this to do composing work on it, because it was such a complex and capable sequencer. But because it is so complex and capable, I'm not going to spend an hour talking about the sequencer in the synthesizer. Most people are just going to use a DAW for this now. I didn't talk about the MIDI button that just allows you to change the MIDI parameters on this. We do have the master volume and the stereo chorus, which is kind of noisy on this. I believe this is an analog stereo chorus. I can't imagine they did a digital one. And then we have a mod wheel with a button that allows you to turn it on and off. Don't know why they added that, but they did. And a pitch bend. And over here you can see underneath the portamento and glide buttons, we have a bend range and a mod depth range that allows you to change how much you're going to bend and how much you're going to modulate for both of those. If we hit this MT button, we can load and save to tape. And there's a cable that I have that plugs, it's got a DIN plug on the back here, and then it's got audio cables to plug into the cassette. And then we have a cartridge. You can plug a RAM cartridge into the back of this thing in a slot there, and you can save and load from that cartridge into your user presets. Over here we have all the different sound design options. So we have two lines, line 1 and line 2. Each of those has a digital oscillator, wave control, and amplitude control. We also have vibrato, and we can change the octave that one of these is playing. So I'm going to select just line 1. So now we're going to be hearing just this on here. And the first thing we're going to do is select our waveform. And I'm going to go, you know what, I'm going to go over here to a blank memory. So we've got something that plays nothing in this slot. And I'm going to press initialize, and I'm going to push each of these in turn. And it will initialize all of these to their default values. And now I should have a sound, which is just a simple sawtooth. So now that I've done that, over here you can see waveform first and second. The first is referring to one of these waveforms here that we can hear. So if I change that while I'm playing a note, you can hear the different waveforms. The first one is a sawtooth. The second one is a square wave. Third one is a pulse. Fourth one, I don't know what they call it. It's got a pulse and kind of like a curvy wave. And then the fifth one is this weird thing that's got a kind of slope and then a square. The 6th, 7th, and 8th are, I was talking about how there's no resonant filter in here. So this is how they do it. They fake it with the 6, 7, and 8. These sounds, or these waveforms rather, have resonance built into them so that it sounds like a filter is closing. So if we go to 6, we can hear, you hear that resonance. And you can hear it actually kind of close out. In the engine that actually modifies where it's playing in that waveform, it changes it as you let go, and the envelope causes that to happen. 7 and 8. So you can hear that closing sound. It sounds like a filter cutoff. So now that we'll put it back to sawtooth, we have a second setting on here, and the second setting is the second part of the waveform. So if we leave it at 0, all we get is just whatever is on 1. But if we change it to something other than 0, if we put this to 2, it's going to do sawtooth for 1 cycle, and it's going to do square for 1 cycle, and alternate between them, and the end result is something that sounds like both. So if I have just the sawtooth, you'll hear sawtooth, but if I add in the square on the second, you can hear there's a sawtooth and a square wave there at the same time. So you can hear those different sounds. Now, you can only have one of these doing the resonant sound. So you can see I've got 6 set up here as a resonant filter on the second. If I go back to the first and try to set it to 6, it won't allow me. It only allows you to have the resonant filter on one of these two. So now I've got the first one is a sawtooth, the second one's a resonant filter sound. So you can see you can mix and match that to get yourself a different kind of sound. Now we do have 2 lines over here, so I could set up the second one on here. I'm going to listen to that one, and what are we going to put in there? We're just going to put a simple square wave in there. And now we could listen to both of those together. So we've got both the sounds that we had in the line 1 and the line 2 added together. However, the line 2 is played at an octave below, I think it is, below. And then we can also change it so that we have 2 copies of the first one. And we can detune that if we want. So we can say detune, get kind of a chorusy effect. do that. Yeah, we can for 1 and 2. So if we have anything where there's 1 and 2 or 2 1s playing, we can do that detune. And it doesn't have to be just a tiny amount. We could also do a note for a fifth, for instance. And then we could also do octaves. So that's our detuning in there, which we can turn off. We also have modulation. So we could say, I want to modulate, ring modulate 1 with 2. Or modulate it with noise. That might work better if I do 1 and 1. Not really. So you can get kind of drum sounds, and there's not much control over the noise at all, but you can do ring modulation. And the ring modulation is how you get the kind of the bell tones out of it. Now that we've set our waveform, the next thing we can do is the envelope. Now the envelope allows us to adjust the pitch of the oscillator. And this is a full envelope. And if you remember, we have an 8-step envelope in here that takes forever to edit. And if you go in here, you can see I've got pitch. Now we're in step 1. I can go into step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we also have the sustain level in here and the end, and then we can change how fast that goes, and we can actually change the level of the envelope at that step, and then we can also determine if that is a sustain or it's so complex. And literally it takes 5 minutes to edit. If I want to go the step 1, so I wanted to start at a 0, that's fine. Okay, so now step 2, which is our initial attack level. We have a rate here, but I want to go to level, and then I'm going to have to go or hold this to get to whatever level I want. And then I'd go to the next step. And so you have to do that for every step. So it just takes forever. Not going to show much more on the envelope editing just because it is really painful. We do have a vibrato we can add in here. You can see we have the delay, rate, and depth, and we have a wave that we can edit. You can see the 4 different vibrato waves that we can add to the oscillator sound. We have a wave follow where we can put the range up, and it'll start at the bottom of the keyboard with whatever wave we selected. So if I start with you can hear the original wave at the bottom, and so we get higher up, it turns into a sine wave. Envelope is the exact same thing, but it does it with an envelope instead. So we can have it form its way through a difference between the original wave and a sine wave. So it's basically how much is of the modification to the waveform during the phase distortion transformation is occurring, but you can also control that with this ridiculous 8-stage envelope. So you can make the sound kind of change over time from something with lots of harmonic information to something with less harmonic information like a sine wave. I didn't really explain it that well, but the DCW, which I was just talking about, is the equivalent of their filter. They don't actually have a resonant filter, but they can take something that has lots of harmonics and then slowly modify that by changing how it's playing that back in the engine with the phase distortion from something that is modified to something that is not modified, which is a sine wave, which means you have something with a lot of harmonics changing to something with almost no harmonics, and that is essentially what exactly a filter does. But it does not have resonance in there other than what's in the original waveform itself, which is why they have those waves 6, 7, and 8 with the built-in resonances. So it's limited in what they can do with resonant sounds because it's only what's preset in those waveforms. But you can filter down to a sine wave and get rid of that buzzy harmonics. So it's kind of a filter, but not really, because you aren't getting that resonant peak shifting as the filter cutoff goes. DCA is a standard amplitude. We have the amplitude range, amplitude key follow, so we can make it that the envelope has little or lots of effect at the lower end, and then less effect up at the top end. And then is our standard ADSR, but plus 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 envelope that we can control the amplitude. Now we do have these two lines, and we can modify both of these, and we can change what we're listening to, like I said here with the line select. So if I've changed this one to be a different wave, I'll change it to 8, and then this one down here is going to be a sawtooth. So here we're listening to that resonant sound. Now we're listening to line 2, which is the sawtooth, or we're listening to both, except one's an octave above, and here we're just listening to just the double copy of line 1, which again we could detune if we wanted to. All right, so now that we've talked about how the synthesizer works, let's have a listen to some of the sounds it can actually do. The user presets are pretty tame. I mean, that's a brass ensemble, it says. String ensemble. Jazz organ. Whistle. Sounds like a sine wave to me there. Fat bass. And might I add, I have the stereo chorus, the scratchy stereo chorus on full for all of these. Vibraphone. That's actually pretty nice. Synth drums. I don't know if I could use that or not. Human voice. That's a stretch. Synth brass. String ensemble 2. Needs a little more release, I think. This is where I wish we had just sliders on here, so if I say, hey, needs more release, I could just go in and quickly add more release rather than going into our DCA envelope and I can go rate the cursor over to, where's my DCA 2, key follow, rate 75. Step 3, I got to sustain. Nope, sustain over here. Rate. Oh, I want release. End. There we go. So, just to get to the release, I guess in the 80s they thought this was way better than just taking a release knob and twirling it or moving a slider. That you actually go in. It's really cool if you have to go in and edit the numbers in a menu, which it's not. Electric piano. I don't think so. Flute. That's actually not a bad flute at all. Synth bass. That's an excellent synth bass. Nice snappy sound at the beginning. Although once you get down below this C2, it's kind of yeah. Crispy xylophone. Steel drum. Not really. Fairy tale. Very nice. Brass ensemble 2. Synth strings. Nah, I don't really think that's very usable. Accordion. Terrible. Blues harmonica. Really? Blues harmonica? Yeah, I don't. Electric guitar. Okay. Modulation is very slow on that one, and I don't feel like going through the menu to fix that. Synth glockenspiel. Synth percussion. That sounds like a gated white noise. Carillon. That's a definitely usable sound. Trumpet. You know, back in the 80s, they decided that they needed to make synthesizers recreate all these sounds, you know, trumpet, accordion, harmonica. They didn't realize that the synthesizer is its own instrument. You don't need to emulate all these other sounds. Violin. See, and they were just kind of crappy emulations of acoustic sounds. Fantastic organ. Well, that's actually pretty good. I like that one. Double reed. Useless. Metallic sound. Kalimba. Hey, that's pretty good. Conga. Typhoon sound. All right, so that is the factory presets, all 32? Yeah, 32 presets. We then have another 32 user sounds, and you can also put a data cartridge in there that you can save and load sounds from. So here we have memory A1. I don't have names for these, but these are, I put 16 sounds that I just picked off the virtual CZ application and loaded them into here. Just a generic synth sound. That's pretty cool. Another good synth bass. A lot of bass harmonic in the sustain there. Usable pad with a little bit of hollowness to it. That's usable. Sounds like glockenspiel again, or a tubular bell. That could be a doorbell. Right. Sounds like a synth, with lots of release in there, with a fifth. Resonant filter sweep in there. Polysynth. All right. More resonant filter sweeps. Nice. Oh, here's a tubular bell. This is when they were going after that DX7 sound. Because the technology behind generating the waves is so similar to the DX7, they can actually get this kind of bell sound out of a synthesis engine. A usable bass. An organ. Another big filter suite. That's another usable sound, I think. But anyway, that's 32 sounds I just picked more or less at random and loaded into it, so that's a sample of what this thing can do. Well, that's it. That's all for the Casio CZ-5000. If you have any questions, comments, or especially corrections, please let me know in the comments section. If you do like this kind of video, click like, subscribe to the channel, it really helps me out. Thanks for watching.